Hi guys, thanks for taking the time to check out WP WebinarSystem. In this tutorial, I want to give you a quick overview of the plugin, its capabilities, and show you how to get set up with your first webinar on your website. WP WebinarSystem is a WordPress plugin that allows you to set up and host webinars from directly within your WordPress website. It handles attendee registration, email reminders, email integration with MailChimp, GetResponse, Drip, MailPoet, Aweber and more, live chat with your attendees, member-only webinars, attendee incentives, and more. WP WebinarSystem can handle 3 different types of webinar. Live webinars, where the host is broadcasting in real time and interacting with the attendees via the chat and questions. Recurring webinars, where a webinar can be configured to repeat multiple times per day, multiple times per week. And just-in-time webinars, which are created automatically every fixed period of time. For example, you could automatically create a webinar every 10 minutes, every 30 minutes, or every hour. That means when an attendee registers, they can access your webinar as quickly as possible without having to wait until the next pre-configured time slot. To create a webinar in WP WebinarSystem, the first thing we need to do is click on the Add New Webinar button. Next, we'll enter a title for our webinar, in this case, SEO mistakes to avoid. I will be the host of the webinar. The body of the post is where we'll put the description of the webinar. Because this is just an example webinar, I'll copy and paste some generated text. The next thing we need to do is choose the type of webinar. So let's scroll down to the webinar settings below, and in webinar type, we'll leave this as live. Next, we'll choose the date of the webinar. In our case, I'll choose the 20th, which is today, and the time of 9 o'clock in the evening. The duration of the webinar will be for 30 minutes. The next thing we need to do is set up the registration page. Here we can configure the background color of the registration page, background image, whether or not we want to show the text content above, the type of content we want to show, such as a YouTube video, a Vimeo video, or an image, and whether or not that video content should autoplay. We can also configure GDPR consent checkboxes here. The next page to configure is the thank you page. Again, here we can customize the look and feel of the page, the title, the background color, the background image, the type of content, and so on. For our example, we'll leave everything as default. Next, we'll move on to the countdown page. Again, we can choose different styling options and decide if we want to show a countdown timer or not. For our example, we'll leave everything as a default value. Next, we'll move on to the live page where we'll configure the source of our broadcast. WP WebinarSystem can handle broadcasts from Google Hangouts, YouTube videos, Vimeo videos, YouTube Live, RTMP, inline frames, and media files such as MP4, WebM, and OGG. For this example, we'll just use Google Hangouts. So the first thing we need to do is click Start HOA Broadcast from YouTube, which will open up the YouTube website. If you see an error message here telling you that you don't have permission to access the page, that means that your YouTube account doesn't have live streaming enabled. Click on the events link to the left and follow the instructions to activate your account. Once you've done that, you'll be able to create a new event. In the title field, we'll use the same title as our webinar, SEO to avoid. Webinar will be for today, and it will start at 9 o'clock in the evening. Now we click on Create Event, and our YouTube event has been created. Next, we right-click on the event title and click on Copy Link Address. Head back over to WP WebinarSystem, and in the Hangouts on Air URL, right-click and paste. That's it. Our webinar is now ready to be published. So let's scroll up to the top and click on the Publish button. Okay, our webinar is now live. To test this out, I'm going to copy this link and open up a copy of Firefox to view the registration page. Here we can see the default registration page. All of these visual aspects can be completely configured to fit in with the look and feel of your website. To test out the registration, I'll enter Joe Blogs and an email address. And sign up. That's it. I now signed up for the webinar and I'll receive a confirmation email. To confirm this, we can head back over to WP WebinarSystem and click on the attendee list. And you can see my attendee is now there. When you're ready to host your live event, simply head back over to YouTube and click on the Start Hangouts on Air button. That will open the Hangouts on Air interface and allow you to start broadcasting. Once you're broadcasting, head back over to WP WebinarSystem and using the status drop-down, change the status of your webinar to live. That will allow your attendees to join the webinar. The last thing we need to do is open the webinar interface. So we click on View. This is the main webinar interface that your attendees will see, except you have the admin toolbar here above, where you can control things like activating the questions, activating incentives, and viewing questions which are being asked by attendees. You can also see the number of attendees who are connected, as well as the status of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions if you activate the question box down below, and they enter their name, email, and question. You'll then see the questions which are being asked up here in the message center. WP Webinar Pro users can also chat with their attendees in real time, as well as showing call to action buttons. Once you finish broadcasting your webinar, simply click on the Stop Broadcasting button in the Hangouts interface, and then in your webinar list, change the status to closed. That's all there is to it. You've created your first webinar and hosted it using WP WebinarSystem. I hope this tutorial has been useful. If you have any questions, please use the contact button below to get in touch. We'll be happy to help.